Good evening to you all. I'm Stu Heller, the moderator of the BALI Speakers Forum, coming to you from our satellite studio in Windermere. And tonight we have the pleasure of listening to Pat Hoglund. I'm going to tell you a bit about Pat, and then Pat's going to tell us about story circles. Pat holds a BA, a bachelor's and a master's in higher education for over 30 years. She was the business manager of her husband John's law practice. She's a graduate of a 2-year program in the Art of Spiritual Guidance Wisdom School. She is a member of the Story Circle Network and has been hosting women's story circles for the last 20 years. Places of presentation of her women's story circle programs include, and she has given them in many places, the Spirit Heals Conference in Victoria, BC, the Hollyhock Retreat Center on Cortez Island in British Columbia, the Wellness Center in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, East West Bookstore in Seattle, and the International Conference for Spiritual Guidance in Los Gatos, California. Pat is also the author of Have I Got a Story for You? Musings on life as she lived it. Her work has been published in the Story Circle Journal. She's married, the mother of 3 children, grandmother to her grandson, and a longtime member of BALI, having served on the board and as the treasurer. Pat, we're delighted to have you tonight. Please tell us about story circles and your experience with them.
Well, thank you, Stu, and thank you for inviting me. It's great to be with everyone. And I'm just going to tell you a little about my journey as a writer and then how this story circle influenced all of that. So when I say I'm a writer, it's interesting to see what comes up for people if they were to say that. Because when I used to say it, I was like, well, I'm not a writer. I mean, writers are professional writers. They get their books published. They went and studied writing. They go on book tours. That's not me. So, but you know, the truth is we're all writers. We write in journals, we write on Facebook, we write blogs, we write correspondence. In business, we're doing reports, evaluations. I mean, we're writing a lot. But I had it in my head that it was a lot more specific than that. And it was all, you know, it was like a profession. And if you weren't at that level, you couldn't say you were a writer. And you know, I didn't do very well in writing in school. You know, I remember, you know, getting all the big C's and D's on my paper, and they were always in red. So writing became very shame-filled for me and a place where I felt less than. And even in, you know, college and graduate school, writing was just torturous for me. And I look back on it and I realized, you know, I didn't take any writing classes. You know, I could have been helped or tutored on how to write and develop more self-confidence around it. But, you know, all I had in my head were all those bad marks on my papers. So eventually, you know, when I joined the business world, I had to start writing because I was writing job descriptions, I was writing policy statements, I was writing evaluations. So I was writing out of necessity. I had to write. And then along the way, I got into therapy and my therapist encouraged me to keep a journal. And he had some suggestions about how specifically to write a journal. And so I took those, made up a journal for myself and started writing. And I just would do a stream of consciousness. And of course, it gave me a lot of freedom because I knew nobody was going to mark it. Nobody was going to read it. So there weren't going to be any C's or D's or red marks or anything like that on my paper. So I became a little more comfortable with writing. And then several years later, when I was in this wisdom school that Stu referred to, I was in one of the seminars one day, and the teacher had given a teaching, and he had us write about whatever, whatever the topic was. I can't remember what it was, but and then after everybody finished writing, he asked if people wanted to share their writing. And there were several people who did. And the guy next to me, who was sitting next to me, he always shared his writing. I think he was a poet too. He was pretty good. So of course, he shared his writing that particular day, and I sat there and listened to it. And for some unknown reason, this small voice inside my head said, your stuff is as good as that. You really should read it. So here's what I read that day. It was called "The Music Plays On." There they are again, those feelings of disconnectedness, except the disconnectedness is not from a place or a person or a feeling or an experience, but it is being disconnected from me. When was it that I first lost my way? When was it that I took that first step away from me that ultimately led to me abandoning me entirely? It didn't seem so critical in the beginning that I said no to me. How was it that I first started to quiet the still small voice inside of me? Was it when I came to the fork in the road and I knew my path went to the right, but everyone else said, no, no one ever goes down there. Come with us to the left and we'll show you the way and be your companion and point out the known guideposts. And I didn't stay long enough to protest. Or perhaps it was the first tiny, insignificant, pleasing thing to avoid censure or criticism or a hard look. It didn't seem important at the time. What harm is there in going along with someone else's vision? After all, that's what supportive people do, don't they? How was it that I managed to silence the symphony playing inside of me? It wasn't as if I only played bass, or the only sound I heard periodically was a light tinkling on the triangle. Mostly I heard the violins playing the melody, the score for my life. And didn't I always hear the bassoon with that rich, deep resonance that one feels in the bottom of your feet? Or the timpani always keeping the beat and the horns calling one hither? It wouldn't have been possible to disconnect all at once just by lowering the baton. It must have been one instrument at a time until all the music was gone, and so was I. I wasn't abandoned along the way by a mad lover or a disappointment or a cold glance. I left me, one day at a time, one lie at a time, one compromise at a time, one "it really doesn't matter" at a time. How was it that I managed to abandon the one I loved more than anyone else, the I in the I am? With whom did I think I could replace her? And how do I recover her? Is it in one violin at a time, or one French horn, or one bassoon? Or is it in the tinkling of a small bell? And each time it rings, I respond, I am here and I love you and I will never leave you again. So when I finished reading that, the room became absolutely still. And all of a sudden I was like, thinking that must have been significant, what I wrote. And so after the program was over, the facilitator came up to me and he said, you know, Pat, that was quite a piece you read. He said, I think you should do more of that. And so we made this agreement that I would write some things and I would send them to him. And he would just be kind of like the holder of my work, because I knew that that's what he would do. He wouldn't make a comment about it or critique it or any of that. So I did that for quite a long time. And then one day, as if by magic, my sister was out visiting with us. And we were up on the peninsula at Port Townsend. And she and I went into this little bakery to get a cup of coffee and something to eat. And they had a magazine rack in the bakery. And so I went over and was perusing it. And there was a particular magazine, I don't even remember the name of it now. But anyway, it seemed interesting. And so I picked it up and I bought it and brought it back to where we were staying and started reading it. And in the very back, there was a little advertisement about a story circle conference, a women's story circle conference that was going on in Austin, Texas. And it just hit me that that was the next thing I should be doing. I should be going to this conference. And I didn't know anything about this organization. It was relatively new. This might have been their second, maybe their third conference, but not more than that. So on a lark, I went to this conference and it just opened up a whole new venue for me, because what they did in the conference was they had several breakout sessions and they had different topics that they were relating about how, you know, to organize your writing and how to, there was some things on self-publishing, and there was a whole program about the critic, how to silence the critic. And one of the sessions was on how to organize a story circle. And the woman who had founded the organization was an English professor at the University of Texas in Austin. And what she had done was put together a whole boilerplate of how you could run a story circle. And so she gave, I mean, it was a whole brochure of the idea being you would bring a group of women together, and the idea would be to celebrate the stories of their lives. So it was really autobiographical. So the material that you would be accessing was your own life. And so the boilerplate recommended that you get together a circle, maybe, you know, 3 to 10 or 12 women, and you meet, you can meet one night a week or twice a month, and then she talked about the group having a facilitator. And she had some other material, books that she had written that she made available. But she gave this whole, I mean, it was a roadmap on how to start a story circle. And what she had devised was a 6-week program. And the idea was women would come together, they would write, and then read or share, if they wished, the stories of their life. And so she even gave like information on how to be a facilitator. And then she did a whole thing on how to promote the story circle. And then she gave a 6-week schedule. And she said, okay, so the first week, for example, you start with introductions, and then you choose a topic for that week. And she gave some examples like the most important event of my life, or a story that illustrates who I am, or why I want to write my life story. And then there were a couple of guidelines. And one was that the topic is picked and you only write for 5 minutes. So what happens when you only write for 5 minutes is your mind doesn't have any chance to do any editing. So you don't have a chance to be like, well, this is really stupid. I don't know why I'm writing this. Nobody's going to be interested in this, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing that happens is it doesn't give enough time for the critic to get organized, to tell you, you know, how you're going to get, you know, a red F on whatever it is, or people will think it's ridiculous what you're sharing, or what. There's none of that. So, so it creates a lot of safety and a lot of freedom for people to just, it's like a stream of consciousness, really. You start writing on the topic, and, you know, before you know it, the 5 minutes is up. And then after that, people have an opportunity to share if they wish. Now, there are a couple of ground rules about the sharing as well. And that is that the other participants cannot critique your work. They can't. It's not an editing process. It's not an advice giving exercise, or it's none of that. The only way you can respond is to share what was elicited from your own experience in what the person shared. So if somebody's sharing a particular experience, maybe that they had on their first day of school, then that can be a prompt for somebody else to say, you know, when you were talking about that, I remember, you know, I did such and such, or something to that effect. But we're not trying to give people advice, or, you know, tell them how it could have been better, or they should have done something else, or anything like that. It's just a safe place. And then this is something that the facilitator is very helpful with, so that people can just be like, yeah, we're all just sharing our life experiences. And my experience with it is that it's also extremely enlightening, because some of the things are we just don't think about that much. And yet, when we have a chance to write about them, I mean, there's a saying that says we don't know what we know until we write it down. And so oftentimes in accessing some of our own story, we can learn some very interesting things that may not have been, I guess, as available to us. For example, this year, I decided to write a chronology of all of the property deals I've done in my lifetime. And so I started writing, you know, the first property I bought and managed. And when I was finished, I was completely shocked, because I had no idea I had done 20 of them. And then I also got a chance to reflect on who was I in business with in some of those real estate deals, and how and how with some of the people I partnered with, it was an amazing experience. While as other people I partnered with, it was a complete and total disaster. And it just gave me a chance to reflect too of, well, what was the attraction to the people that I'd had really good experiences with, and what was the attraction of the people that I didn't have such good experience with? And then how did that all turn out? And what would I have done differently? So it just gave me, and it also gave me an opportunity to appreciate my skills at real estate investing, because I made some really great investment. Now there were a couple that weren't so good, but by and large, they were, successful. And so it gave me an opportunity to say, yeah, job well done. And I wouldn't have gotten to that if I hadn't been writing down, some of the things that were significant for me. So anyway, back to the story circle. So I had this boilerplate in my hand, and I came home and I said, I can do this. This will be fun. So I got a church to let me use a room in their facility, and I put a little ad in the social section of the newspaper, I can't remember now, and just said that I was offering this story circle for 6 weeks, and where we were meeting, and I was really quite certain nobody would show up. It was just a lark of mine. However, 12 women showed up, and I did the story circle, and it was an amazing experience for everyone involved. And the very things that that the woman who organized initially the story circle had said would happen did. And I also got to see that there are a lot of things that women won't say about their lives. They don't feel safe enough to relate some of the things that have gone on in their life. But in a safe, accepting environment where everyone basically is sharing their vulnerabilities, and people don't have to share. You don't have to read whatever it is that you've written. But I found that that people were very eager to share their story and very appreciative of hearing other people's stories. Oftentimes we know people as adults and we don't know anything about their childhood or their growing up or life experiences that they've had along the way. So I guess I got the story circle bug, and just people in my circle invited me to come to their facility and do a program. Like I did a program in British Columbia. That woman was in my story circle. My sister invited me. She was running a wellness center in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. She invited me to come and do the story circle. And there were women in that story circle that I did. Now, I only did a seminar. I didn't do the 6 weeks, who went and started story circles too. And then after all of that, I decided to, one last thing I wanted to say was, one of the other things that happened with one of the prompts was it was called Personal Maps and the Meaning of Places. That was the prompt. And they gave out, I subsequently went to more of these conferences in Texas. And this one time they gave a prompt with a map of the United States. And what you were to do was you were to mark the places that you had lived and then write about the meaning of those places. And so I did that. And I wrote about my childhood home and how eager I was to get out of it. It was a very small town in southern New Jersey. There were only 10,000 people. The nearest city was Philadelphia, which was 2 hours away. It was very isolating, except in the summertime when it went to 300,000 people because it was a seashore resort. And I just felt that there was a bigger world out there and I wanted to experience it. And so I couldn't wait to get out. And so I did, I went to college. I never did go back, but then one of the places I wrote about was Olympia, Washington, which is where John and I wound up when we moved to the West Coast. And in writing about it, I realized that I had replicated my life in New Jersey, in Olympia. I had basically moved to the same kind of town. Small town, everybody knew everybody, you know, 3 families ran the place. Kind of closed. So it was interesting to think about, how did that happen? That I was so eager to get away from it, and yet I recreated it. And so what it really led to was, well, where do you really want to live? And that's how eventually we wound up moving to Seattle. So all of that came out of that writing, that awareness that I don't know that I would have accessed any other way. And I'm deeply appreciative of that. And so another reason why I'm just very fond of the story circles. And then I decided later on that I would publish my work. And it was just for my edification. I didn't expect to be on the New York Times bestseller list. It wasn't any of that. It was just to have my work memorialized, I guess. So I don't know whether you can see it, but here's the book. It's called Have I Got a Story for You? And the Story Circle also did a whole thing on how to self-publish, which was quite interesting. And it wasn't as expensive as I thought perhaps it would be. So I guess when I think about my whole journey with writing, it's really been transformative. Oh, I was going to read you one of the stories that I put in the book. Hold on a sec. That story I read in the beginning was in the book as well. But this was another one called What Should I Do? I have young adult children who live across the country from me, so we are often talking on the phone with each other. The other day, I received a call from my daughter, and she was amplifying the many melodramas in her life. I had been here before, so I decided to lean back in my chair and listen to the tortured rendition of life as she was currently living it. I heard how the roommate was a slob and so very inconsiderate of any of her concerns or priorities. Her boyfriend was an insensitive pig, and she couldn't understand how she could ever have agreed to go out with him in the first place. Then her teacher was very unappreciative of all of her great gifts and was mean because she was asking her to do things that were way above her reach. And of course, the job was abusive. She had to deal with all these hostile customers who never thought to say thank you. And her boss was completely inconsiderate of her feelings. And in the end, she thought she should quit her job and school and move to Europe. So I had been sitting back and filing my nails while listening to this ranting and trying to say the occasionally supportive, "Yes, I understand, dear, that must be hard," or the poignantly placed, "Yes, I see," or just the curt, "uh-huh." Suddenly, as if from nowhere, I heard her say, "So, Mom, what do you think I should do?" Totally shocked, I lurched forward in my chair and had this surreal experience where it seemed the pause button had been pushed on my phone and our conversation went into suspended animation. And I started to tell her, "Well, I don't know why you ever picked your roommate to begin with. I knew she and you wouldn't be compatible, and I'd get her to move out as quickly as possible. And the boyfriend was a complete loser from the start. That was apparent to the uninitiated. What were you thinking when you took up with him? As for your teacher, find someone who will appreciate your genius and never challenge you around anything. After all, who better to know your skill than you? And that job has been the worst possible place you could have picked to work. I'd file a complaint with someone about how difficult you're having it. Quit your job and move to Europe? What a spectacular idea. Can I come?" After this fantasized ranting of mine, I snapped back into my sane mind. The pause button was canceled and I was heard to say, "Well, I don't know, dear. What do you think you should do?" She does, of course, have all the answers for her quest, and my job is just to listen to the ravings while she navigates the vagaries of life. Or, as Gertrude Stein said, there ain't no answer, there ain't gonna be any answer, there never has been an answer, that's the answer. Now that's pretty old because my kids are way out of college, but I wrote that when they were in. So, yeah, so I just would encourage those of you who are writing, continue to write. Those of you who don't, start without hesitation. Because I say with confidence, I am a writer, and it's fun. So that's my story of the story circle. I did do a story circle, by the way. I forgot to say that, Stu, at Bet Olive. I had a story circle for a while at Bet Olive. So thank you for letting me share all of that. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Yes. Fantastic. I love that, your stories, especially that first one was amazing. But here's my question. I mean, how do you do something like that in 5 minutes, stream of consciousness? If I were to get to that level, I mean, I'd be polishing away for hours. The right word and all of this. So how does that factor in? Or doesn't it?
Well, it factors in because the critic starts right away. The critic speaks first and loudest. And so there's not any opportunity for that. I mean, it's a lot of people who are not used to writing or who have a lot of judgments about it, like I did. They can't do any of that. So, I'm the facilitator. I give the prompt. We start to write, and after 5 minutes, it's like, stop. And whatever you have written is what is available to you to share. Now, some people, if they hit on something that they really want to explore, they do it on their own. They go home and do it themselves. I mean, a lot of people will open a journal, for example, as a result of this. And like, I could never have written that whole thing about the 20 places that the 20 real estate deals that I did. I could never have written that in 5 minutes. I couldn't have even written how many there were in 5 minutes. But and the thing about place, that took a lot longer too. But usually it's just a stimulus for people to start realizing, oh, I can do this. This is available to me, because the material is your own life. You don't have to make anything up. You don't have to create the major, the big novel or the plot or any of that. It's your own life that you're dealing with. For example, some of the prompts that she has is the story of my birth, my most memorable birthday, my first day at school, my first kiss, my first apartment. What home brings up the most pleasant memories? In what home did I learn the most valuable lesson of my life? I mean, a lot of us don't really reflect on that often, but when you're prompted to, you suddenly realize, oh yeah, write a 3-minute story about the best moment or event of a relationship. So for me, I think what it does is it taps into the creative imagination, that creative piece in us that calls up events in our life that we may have considered quite mundane, and put a new twist on it. And then it's interesting, when other people share what they've written about some of their relationships or what happened on their first day of school, and you're like, oh yeah, that reminds me of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or I remember how scared I was when I first went, I never rode a school bus to school. The schools were within walking distance of my home. And so, other people rode school buses. So it just, I could even fantasize about what it would have been like if I had been able to ride a school bus. So it's just that creative instinct, that creative urge that gets, I think, ignited in all of that. And there's no judgment about any of it. I'm not going to be edited. It's not going to be graded. It's for my own edification. And then I can take the writing wherever I want it to go. Yeah, Sherry, you had a question?
Yeah, you're inspiring me. And I wanted to ask you now, do you write with pen and paper, or do you use the computer? How do you go about it?
Well, in the story circle, we use a pen and paper.
Yeah.
For me, there's something about putting a pen to paper, which also, I do write on the computer, I do. But there's something about putting a pen to paper, which somehow unlocks a certain part of my brain, which enables me once again to further access that creative space. And the other thing I do sometimes is, if I get stuck on something, I keep moving my pen. I just keep it going until something comes, until I get a breakthrough. So I don't exactly know how to explain what happens in my head, but I know it happens. And writing it with a pen and paper just facilitates that.
Thank you.
Yes, Ellen.
Hi, thank you for sharing and for reading and talking so eloquently about your writing practice. I was just going to add that and I don't know if there's others, but I'm in a memoir writing class right now at Hugo House. And the writer Natalie Goldberg talks a lot about, so writing practice, it's about just developing that muscle. And when you write with a pen, it's harder to edit. So the prompts, the whole point of the prompts is to just sit down and let that creative part of your brain just take over, and to silence the judge, to silence the critic. The critic can come back, when it's time to edit, but pretty amazing stuff gets written when you only have 3 minutes or 5 minutes. I don't know if you've found that, but
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because we don't have a chance to get all that churning going on, thinking about it. And then, I always almost start editing before I even get to writing, and so when it's a pressure write like that, you don't have a chance to do that. And I also, I've done writing to my critic and just told my critic what for. And what, where they can go and sit and be quiet. Just so it informs that part of my brain that says, no, we're not gonna be criticizing this. This is fun. This is enlightening. Because, as I was talking about the place, my homes, I would never have really gotten to that without writing about it. I had never thought about the similarities between, and, from one opposite side of the country to the other. I was raised on the East Coast, moved to the West Coast, and replicated my living environment. And my father was a city official. He was, my parents were business owners. My mother ran a hotel. My father ran several eateries. They were well-known people. And John became very well known as a lawyer in Olympia. It was this kind of the same kind of dynamic. And then my children, who I thought I had given them an opportunity for a bigger world because I was not living in this little town anymore, they all left. And then they went to bigger and better, bigger places. They found that it was a little too confining for them too. 2 of my girls went to school on the East Coast. Mark went to school in Illinois. So it was so interesting to reflect on all of that. Yeah. Are you writing your memoir now, Alan? How long have you been in the class?
I'm in my the second quarter, and it's starting to take shape. I have a title, and I'm fleshing more things out, and it's hard work, but I've had a journal of some kind for most of my life, and it's actually kind of fun now. I'm going back over some of the old pieces, and because I'm mining for some more material, and it's really interesting just from a thematic, perspective, trying to figure out, well, what were my themes in my 20s versus now in my 60s. But Natalie Goldberg, her books have really helped, like Writing Down the Bones, and then Anne Lamott, who wrote the book Bird by Bird. And she basically, the best piece of advice I think she's ever given is, okay, well, first you have to write that shitty little first draft, and then you can go back and rewrite it or edit it, and then you have something that's hopefully publishable. And it's all about just getting, the pen moving across the paper,
Right,
and silencing the critic. But I
Yes.
think your idea to write to your critic is a really good idea.
yeah. I really told it off.
Did it help? Did it help?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, I had it like, had this visualization of tying it to a chair and putting tape over its mouth. I got,
Oh, duct tape, yes.
I got very visual about my critic really shutting up.
What was the title of your book again?
Have I got a story for you? And it's just little vignettes, like the one that I read, you know, mostly from, mostly, now this is old. It was written many years ago, but mostly stories of, you know, my family. They always give me great material. They're like, as a matter of fact, you know, something will come up and they'll be like, oops, that's going to wind up in a story. Mom's going to be writing about that one, which is usually true. Yes, Linda.
I'm from New Jersey too. That's not why I raised my hand, but I want
Oh.
to tell you I'm from New Jersey too. But
Oh, are you?
I'm from
Where
the
are you
New York. I'm from the New York part of New Jersey,
Where's that?
not the Philly part. Essex County. Do you know Essex County?
Yeah.
South Orange, Maplewood, Short Hills.
My husband was from Ridgewood.
Oh, okay.
Oh
So-
my gosh. I live next to Ridgewood.
Really?
You did?
Where?
Well, in a small town North Haledon, New Jersey,
Huh,
about 3 towns from.
interesting. Interesting.
I should
Yeah.
write a book about New Jersey. I was wondering, I was listening to what you were saying and thinking about the work that I've done since I joined Bet Aleph with the rabbi. I go to meditation every day, which is kind of not getting there, but doing it. And I actually did that retreat, which I mean, I never thought I could do it. But I just wonder whether you consider, some of the things that you were saying about silencing your inner critic and all the material whirling around reminds me of some of the things he says, like kind of to guide us when we're meditating. And I just wondered whether it feels spiritual to you ever.
The writing?
Yeah, or just, the whole experience, whether it has a spiritual element.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, how I came to writing is for me a God shot. I mean, how I came, the therapist that I was seeing was an author.
Mhm.
And so he was, you know, very encouraging about, you know, journaling, keeping, and then the fact that I was in that bakery that day with my sister and saw that magazine, you know, that was a God shot. Who would have thought that, you know, I would have picked up that magazine and then looked in the back and suddenly got this message about, you should go to the conference. It was like out of the blue. And then going to the conference and then coming back and for some reason thinking, oh, I should do this. And then all these women showing up. I mean, yeah. And then all of the experiences of women sharing their stories around the story circles that I've had, it's been very spiritual. And it's about trust. It's about vulnerability. It's about holding the space. I mean, I think that's what the rabbi does when he's doing meditation. He's holding the space so that we're able to go deep into meditation. And it's the same thing. And I learned that from my spiritual teacher, the person that I did the wisdom school with. He's a master at holding the space so that people feel safe sharing, people feel like they can explore things maybe that are a little scary, or look at some of the issues in their life they've been afraid to look at, relationships that aren't working, jobs that aren't working, practices that aren't working. So yeah, definitely for me has a spiritual component. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Pat,
I just say one other thing. I always find when I write things down that I feel like my inner critic or whatever is monitoring what I'm writing and controlling what I'm writing, because I'm seeing what I'm writing and then I'm thinking about what I'm writing and then I don't like what I'm writing.
Mhm.
But is that a typical experience for
Oh,
people?
absolutely. Absolutely. That's why they talk about, I mean, she had a whole, and one of the seminars, she did a whole thing on, it's called Giving Your Critic the Slip.
Mhm.
How to get words on paper you feel good about. Learn how to write fast and edit after. That's a good way to keep the critic at bay. Because as I said, the critic doesn't have enough time to get organized to tell you how shitty it is.
Mhm.
So absolutely. And the visualization that I had around my critic was very, very helpful. It just got implanted in my subconscious. So when my critic wanted to say something, it was over there bound to the chair with tape across its mouth.
So cool.
So it didn't have an opportunity to, to start rumbling about how awful it was, or how stupid it was, or how whatever it was. It is what it is. It's my story, and I get to tell it whatever way I wish. And I get to honor, I mean, that's the other thing I think I came away with. I get to honor the pieces of my story that I have taken for granted, that I've said things like, oh, I did that. Anybody can do that. No big deal. It's not true. It's not true. Even if it's something that other people have done, they haven't done it like I have. They haven't done it with my energy and my presence. So yeah, it's been it's been very validating, I guess. I'll say that. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming. Appreciate all of you, and thanks for your questions, and get
Well,
to
thank
writing.
you.
Get
Well,
that pen
Thank you.
and
Thank you
paper.
for sharing.
Thank
The-
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Before you disappear, Pat, I had a question,
Oh,
and then we'll get into the promotions for upcoming
Oh,
sessions.
okay.
But I wonder if sometimes somebody will ask you a question and your reaction is, it would take me a while to explain this to you, but here, read this.
Is that a question?
Yeah, because you've put it down on paper, but somebody is asking you to vocalize something, and rather than vocalize it in that moment, you might just be encouraged to say, read this. I've been there, done that. Here's what I think about that.
I haven't done that. I haven't done that. But then I'm a very verbal person too. So I probably would be more apt to verbalize whatever it is. Yeah. No, I haven't done that.
Okay.
Is that what you would like to do?
I don't know. I'm a very careful speaker and an even more careful writer. I think the carefulness in writing, I would attribute to being a lawyer, but
Mhm.
maybe that's why I'm a lawyer because I write carefully. It's the same thing with reading. I can't read fast. I think I need to read every word
Mhm.
and I need to understand how they go together. And that's a cumbersome process. But as a lawyer, you don't want to miss some words that could turn out to be important.
For
And
sure.
in my head, somebody will ask me a question, and maybe they don't, but I rehearse in my head what my answer is going to be. It's rare that I will just, spout
But
something.
don't you think, Stu, that that really comes from the discipline that you had to develop as an attorney?
Let's hope so.
I mean, you have to be measured in what you're saying because you're giving people advice that can be can be life altering. I mean, and so yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I think for me, the thing that has happened, the more I write and the more comfortable I get, the more easy it is for me to get things onto paper. For example, when my brother passed away, I offered to do the eulogy. And because of the writing I've done, it came very easily to me. I went back and found several significant things that he had done in his life that I wanted to speak about, but I was also able to describe him and his life in a way that I felt reflected it in honoring him at his memorial service. So I guess the kind of explanation writing has become easier the more I have written and the more I read. And that's another thing I didn't ever get the connection with, was if you read a lot, it enhances your writing ability.
Definitely.
I never got that. My parents were not people who read to us or who I never had like Nancy Drew books or, any of the series books as a child. And I never checked, my mother never took me to the library. So I never got that piece about reading until I was an adult. And now I'm in 2 book clubs. I mean, it's a little bit much, but now I love it. I take 3 books with me on vacation, and once again, it encourages those creative juices, I guess, for me. So, but I think it's your discipline, Stu. I mean, I have often said to John, when somebody will ask him something or will say something and he's like, got the answer. And I'm like, really? Didn't you want to like think about that a minute? And it's because when you say something in court and your opposing counsel jumps up and says, I object, you have to be ready to say something. You can't say, listen, I'll get back to you in a week. When I do some more research or I think about that a little. And so I think it's just part of the training. And I think it's an asset. Maybe you find it cumbersome for some of the things that you're wanting to do, but I think being deliberate is a great asset. I'm sorry you have so much trouble with the reading though. And I can understand why you went to audiobooks.
Well, thank you. I mean that seriously. I can see that all of this has increased your confidence in yourself, in believing in yourself. And I think that's wonderful, and it's infectious. I can feel it through my computer monitor here.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was my pleasure to share my little journey with my writing and my story circle. It's an important part of my story.
Well, it's not a little journey, and thank you for sharing it.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you.